Hi AWS, my name is Urwa Shafiq and today's my presentation is about introduction to serverless in AWS. Let's first discuss the main agenda for today's presentation. We have introduction to serverless, second we have core AWS services for serverless architecture, and third we have benefit of using serverless, and fourth we have use case of serverless architecture, and then end we have summary. Let's get started. First of all, introduction to the serverless. What is mean by serverless? Let's take an example for that. Do you ever wonder that the companies like Netflix and Airbnb provide their services to their customer without any lag, without any glitch? Yes, and we customer utilize their services by watching movies on Netflix and utilizing services of Airbnb. Here comes the serverless. Serverless doesn't mean that a service without a server. It means that on-demand service and less server involvement. There is a less server involvement in this scenario. So yeah, it means the ability to build and run any kind of application without having to provision and maintenance the underlying infrastructure. Simply we can say that less server involvement and on-demand services. Moving to the next slide, core AWS services for serverless architecture. What are those core AWS services that we have to use for our deployment of application as a fully serverless? Let's discuss the first service. We have AWS S3, simply storage services. S3 means that your data have to store into the buckets and it is very reliable and cost effective. You can see the architecture diagram of Amazon S3 service. Moving to the next service, we have AWS Lambda. What is AWS Lambda? AWS Lambda is a serverless event-driven compute service that let you run code for virtually any type of service or backend service without provisioning or managing server. AWS Lambda, in AWS Lambda, you don't have to worry about anything else. You just have to upload your code and Lambda will take care of that. Right now, Lambda can support multiple programming language like Python, Java, Go, Node.js, and many more. You can see the architecture diagram of AWS Lambda, how it works. Moving to the next service, we have AWS DynamoDB. It is a fully serverless, NoSQL database service that enables you to develop modern application at any scale. It can handle 10 trillion requests per day and it is readily accessible, means that you don't have to manually create copies of your database. In fact, DynamoDB can replicate your data across multiple AWS region, which is a big advancement of this AWS service. And yes, it is a pay as you go model. You have to pay for a service and then you can use this service. Lastly, we have a API gateway. What is API gateway? API gateway is act like a front door for application to access data from the backend services. Yeah, API gateway can support REST APIs and HTTP APIs. And this is one of the main important AWS service for the serverless architecture. So, architecture diagram of serverless application on AWS. What is the architecture diagram? So yeah, this is the main core for services, and there is a user. How they can interact with each other in this way. This is the way they can interact with each other. First of all, user can interact AWS service S3, and then AWS S3 service can interact with the AWS API gateway, which acts as a front door, and then it interact with the AWS Lambda, and then Lambda will interact with the AWS DynamoDB, and these are the main backbone services of many AWS applications. And then there is the advantage and benefits of serverless computing. Scalability, low cost, simplifies development, improve flexibility and more efficiency. These are the main big advantages of using serverless computing. And then we have use case of serverless architecture. We have media processing and the chatbots. There are many other several advantage and use cases of serverless architecture, but these are the main among them. Summary. So let's conclude this. What we have discussed today. We have discussed introduction to serverless, course AWS services for serverless architecture. They are four in number, and then benefit of using serverless architecture in cloud computing, and then in the end use case of serverless architecture, which are media processing and the chatbots. So yeah, thank you so much.